All right, so this next part is about vernacular literature. That's what it says down at the bottom. Vernacular literature. So you know what literature is. The term vernacular is probably not a term that you use all the time, if ever. All right? Vernacular. So in the first bullet there, it says that some writers wrote in language of their regions. So they would write in Italian, or they would write in English, or they would write in French. So the works of Dante and Chaucer, all right, made vernacular literature more popular. So vernacular is Italian, English, or French. Vernacular is what you speak. As opposed to what almost all other language, all other writing was written in, which we just said mostly was either Latin or Greek. The Greek kind of falls away, and when we are thinking about the books that are written, they were written mostly in Latin. Most of the books that they would have read in the Renaissance were written in Latin. So that Latin used to be the language. If you were literate, if you knew how to read and write, we say that you knew how to read and write Latin. Right? So the vernacular then is writings in the language that people spoke. Let me find a good example. There it is. Ooh, maybe somebody else could do it. That would be awesome. There we go. Okay, let me show you this. Okay, so when we talk about the vernacular, we talk about how people spoke, and that includes English. So there used to be this phase, I don't know how much of this you're familiar with, but have you ever heard of the term Ebonics? No? Okay, that's probably a good thing. Great. So Ebonics was a push to legitimize essentially slang speech, right, to make it a formal form of language. Now our English today, we adopt new words all the time and stuff like that. Memes and things have a way of working into our language. So English has changed over time. This is what it was like when it was in the Middle Ages.
And barded every vine in such liquor, of which fair tree engendered before. One Zephyrus, eke with his sweeter breath, inspired hath in every holt and earth the tender progress. And the young Sunna hath in the ram his halva course run.
That's English. It's the same English that we speak. All right? So they took how they spoke, and then they started to write in that. Instead of speaking one and writing in Latin. That's what vernacular is. Now, if you do that, if you write in the way people speak, what impact does that have? What can you do that you couldn't do if you only wrote in Latin? So we've got two things here. We've got Latin only for written things, and then now we have vernacular writing. What does this do for what you've written? If I start writing books in vernacular, what changes? Okay, the language changes, And also, who can read this? Everybody. Everybody can read this. Who can read this? Only the people who have learned Latin. So unless you're a part of the church or you've gone to school or something like that. So this is for like the elite. Those people. Right? Elite people. In Latin. So this was a very specific club of people. This is everybody. So if you want to communicate to everybody, which one are you going to write in? The vernacular. If you want to change the way people think, are you going to write in this? No, you're going to write in this. Right? So when we develop humanism, and we want to impact the way people think, what do we write in? Vernacular. Okay? So they change how they think, and then they change how they communicate by writing in the vernacular so that more people can read it. Right? So that leads us to B. Well, the end of A says it helps make vernacular language more popular because Dante and Chaucer's works were really popular. Not only were they written in the vernacular, they weren't boring. Right? Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, have you learned about that? No? Oh, it's good. It's Shakespeare also writes in the vernacular. One of the things that Shakespeare has in common with Chaucer and Dante is this word. Bawdy. You familiar with that word? No? Bawdy, it means crude. It means it talks about things like sex and things that people might snicker at and laugh, and things about, the size of men's hands and their feet and how that relates to other parts of their anatomy and those kinds of things. That would make people kind of laugh, just like that. Right? So they wrote about things like religion and government, but they didn't write it to praise the Pope or to praise the king. They wrote it to communicate and to entertain regular people. So in Canterbury Tales, in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, he talks about regular people and what they did and what they thought about things like the church and marriage and sex and kids and lying and wealth and what it meant to be a good person in kind of an offhanded kind of way. Not, I'm going to be a good person, but, I'm struggling every day. My life kind of sucks, but I want to be good. So how do I do that? And it has a bunch of jokes in it. Dante's Divine Comedy, which includes, the Inferno and Purgatory and Heaven, which nobody reads because Heaven isn't nearly as fun or funny as Hell is. But in Dante's Divine Comedy, he actually goes on this trip into Hell, where Hell has all these layers, and people are in different layers based on their sin. And it's kind of a really interesting trip, because everybody gets punished in accordance to what they did. So liars spend all their time in hell having their tongue pulled out and flayed and fed back to them. And as they go down, you get people who are people who have affairs and people who cheat and people who steal and people who murder and all that. And then at the very bottom of hell, because it's a spiral, the very bottom level is the devil and Judas Iscariot, the guy who betrayed Jesus. Right? So it is very entertaining for the people of the time, which is why they read it, and they were able to read it because it was in the vernacular. Okay. All right, this is the next to the last slide. Okay, so there's a little summary of Canterbury Tales. I just talked to you about that. Well, I didn't tell you that it was about 29 pilgrims going to visit the tomb of Thomas Becket in Canterbury. But as they go on this pilgrimage to this holy site, the grave of Thomas A. Becket, they talk to each other and we learn about who they are. Right? And in that, we learn about what they think and how they live and all of that. So it's a story about a trip and things that happen along the way. Not necessarily snakes on a plane, but close. Thanks. All right, so the last one is Christine de Pizan, who wrote her work in French. She wrote the book of The City of Ladies and talked about male writers who their inferences about women and how wrong they were, right? That women are somehow not able to learn, that they're easily swayed by their passions, all those stereotypes that were in existence in that period of time, which we don't believe today. So that's 1404, she wrote about that. We still have some people who aren't quite sure that they have realized that, which is the whole Gamergate thing. So definitely people you need to know would be like Dante and Chaucer. You will definitely hear about them in your English class, hopefully, at some point in your high school career. You probably won't hear about Christine de Pizan. Her work is just not as popular to study in English, primarily because it was written in French and not in English. Dante, Chaucer, and Christine de Pizan. Those are three authors that you'll need to know. Dante's Inferno, which is the best of the three of his Divine Comedy, right? He does heaven, he does purgatory, and he does hell.
Have you seen the game? They actually made a game of it.
Yeah. And there's lots of movie references to Dante's Inferno, and the trip, how he goes and he learns about all these people. And he meets specific people along the way. They don't really mean much to us, but it would be like if you went into hell and you ran into Michael Jackson and you ran into, I think of other people who have died, Ronald Reagan, former president, names that you would recognize. So in the trip in hell, Dante bumps into these people, and it's kind of his commentary on them where they are in hell. So like if President Obama had died, where he was in hell would be Dante's opinion of how Obama was as a person.
Go on the game, he sees his father,
Yep.
and then his father's like in this giant. He's like a monster. He's so ugly
Yep.
and scary, but he's in this place where there's a lot of gold, money, because he was very, I guess he was selfish.
Okay, like a miser.
Yeah.
He hoarded all his money.
Yeah.
All right, okay.
That was his opinion. So
Wilbur.
that's why he was there.
So if I tap your shoulder, you got to sit up. All right. All right, so the last part asks you this question, which talks a little bit about what we just said with Christine de Pizan, right, and those inferences, and raises this question: does contemporary society, where we live now, in general, treat girls and boys equally in terms of educational capacities and opportunities? Would you say that this school and or other schools or your classes, wherever you want to set the scope, your experiences in general, do they treat girls and boys equal as far as what they can learn and what opportunities they have? Yes.
Would you please cross-click any twins for the
We haven't
tomorrow?
gotten any yet. Is today the last day?
Tomorrow's the last
Tomorrow's
day.
the last. Okay, I'll talk to him.
No problem.
Thank you. All right, so this is essentially just your opinion, right? Goes in the notes. It's the last part of the lecture. Kind of spinning off of what we talked about with Christine de Pizan's book.